The outsider's mirror. Naira adjusted the luminescent drapes around her face for the 7th time that morning, ensuring they covered the irregular patterns of her bioluminescent markings. Among her people, the Zephyrians, such markings should form perfect geometric patterns, sacred fractals that repeated in elegant symmetry across their silver skin. Hers, however, swirled in chaotic waves, breaking every rule of their aesthetic doctrine. The laboratory's crystalline walls reflected her image from every angle, a constant reminder of her divergence from Zephyrian beauty standards. She focused instead on her work, manipulating the holographic controls of the atmospheric stabilizer. The Interstellar Research Institute was her sanctuary, where her brilliance in xenobotany overshadowed her appearance, most of the time. Lead researcher Naira, the lab's AI announced, "Your presence is requested in the Grand Assembly." The Earth delegation has arrived. Naira's heart sank. Public appearances meant scrutiny, meant whispers, meant the sideways glances of her perfectly symmetrical peers. But as the head of the Botanical Integration Division, her attendance wasn't optional. "Acknowledge," she murmured, gathering her research tablets. The drapes around her face shimmered as she moved, their iridescent fabric designed to mask what couldn't be corrected. The Grand Assembly was a marvel of Zephyrian architecture, a vast dome of living crystal that adapted its transparency to the needs of its occupants. Today it was set to a translucent azure, casting everything in a cool, professional light. Naira took her place among the other division leaders, trying to make herself as inconspicuous as possible. Director Wheeler, their leader, stood at the center of the assembly, his symmetrical markings glowing with perfect rhythm, the very embodiment of Zephyrian beauty. "Today marks a historic partnership," he announced, his voice resonating through the crystal chamber. "Earth has chosen to share their terraforming technology with us, and in return, we will provide our botanical expertise." The Earth delegation entered, and Naira couldn't help but stare. Humans were fascinating in their asymmetry, each one unique, imperfect, yet somehow confident in their irregularity. One of them caught her eye, a tall man with uneven features, a scar across his left eyebrow, and the strangest, most captivating smile she'd ever seen. Marcus Hayes, Director Wheeler introduced him, Earth's leading expert in planetary transformation. Marcus stepped forward, and to everyone's surprise, he spoke in nearly perfect Zephyrian. "The honor is ours," he said, then did something unprecedented. He looked directly at each person in the room, including Naira. When their eyes met, he didn't flinch or quickly look away as her own people did. Instead, his smile widened. The meeting proceeded with formal presentations, but Naira found herself distracted. She'd never been looked at like that before, like she was worth seeing. Later, in the research wing, Naira was examining a specimen of adaptive fungi when a shadow fell across her workstation. "Fascinating structure," Marcus's voice came from behind her. "The way it changes color to match its environment, reminds me of your drapes." Naira stiffened. "The drapes are traditional," she said automatically, the practiced response to any mention of her covering. "Really? I've noticed only you wear them among your colleagues." There was no judgment in his voice, only genuine curiosity. "I'm Marcus Hayes, by the way. I'll be working closely with your division on the terraforming project." She turned slowly, bracing herself for the moment his curiosity would turn to polite discomfort. "I am lead researcher Naira." But Marcus was already moving around her workstation, examining the fungi with genuine interest. "I read your paper on adaptive botanical integration. Your theories about cross-species symbiosis could revolutionize how we approach terraforming." "You read my work?" "Multiple times. Your understanding of how different species can complement each other rather than compete, it's brilliant." He looked up at her, that strange smile returning. "Though I admit, I was surprised when I saw you. Your writing is so precise, mathematical. But you're more like your theories than your equations." "What do you mean?" Naira asked, her markings flickering with confusion beneath her drapes. "Complex. Unexpected. Beautiful in ways that can't be reduced to simple patterns." He said it casually, as if he were discussing the weather, not shattering every conception she had about how others saw her. Naira's markings flared with emotion, their chaotic patterns briefly visible through the drapes. She waited for him to recoil, to make an excuse and leave. Instead, he leaned closer, fascinated. "They're like auroras," he said softly. "On Earth, we have these lights in the sky, they dance, they flow, they never take the same shape twice. People travel thousands of miles just to see them." On Zephyria, Naira found herself saying, "Beauty is measured in symmetry, in perfect repetition. My patterns, they don't follow the rules." Marcus shrugged. "Maybe that's what makes them beautiful. Rules are for mathematics, not for living things." He gestured to the fungi they'd been discussing. "Look at this specimen, it's beautiful because it adapts, because it changes. Perfection is static. Life isn't meant to be static." For the first time in her adult life, Naira felt the weight of her drapes as what they were, a barrier, not a shield. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached up to adjust them, not to hide this time, but to allow a small section of her markings to show. Marcus smiled, but not at her markings, at her eyes. "There you are," he said simply. "Now, about your theory on symbiotic adaptation, I have some ideas I'd love to discuss." As they delved into scientific discussion, Naira realized something had shifted. In Marcus's presence, she felt neither hidden nor exposed, just present, just herself. Her markings continued their eternal dance beneath her drapes, but for the first time, their rhythm felt less like chaos and more like music. The crystal walls still reflected her image, but now she saw what he saw, not an aberration, but an aurora, unique in all the universe. And perhaps, she thought, that was a kind of perfection too, beyond surface deep. The terraforming lab hummed with energy as massive holographic projections displayed the surface of Kepler-9, their target planet. Naira stood before the swirling data streams, her markings pulsing with concentration beneath her now slightly looser drapes. 2 weeks had passed since the Earth delegation's arrival, and while her coverings remained, they felt different now, more like a choice than a necessity. "The soil samples are proving problematic," she announced to Marcus, who was studying the molecular breakdown of the planet's atmosphere. "The mineral composition resists standard modification protocols." Marcus ran a hand through his already disheveled hair, making it stand up at odd angles. Naira found herself fascinated by how humans could look so naturally irregular yet carry themselves with such ease. "Show me," he said, moving to her workstation. As she pulled up the detailed analysis, their shoulders nearly touched. Naira noticed how her markings brightened involuntarily, creating patterns that rippled like water across her skin. Once, this would have mortified her. Now, she found herself less concerned with hiding them. "See here," she pointed to a particular molecular chain. "The indigenous microorganisms have created a lattice structure that's actually perfect." Marcus interrupted, his eyes lighting up. "Don't you see? We've been trying to break down the existing structure, but what if we work with it instead? Like your theories about symbiotic adaptation." Naira's markings flickered with surprise. "You mean use the native biology as a foundation rather than an obstacle?" "Exactly." His enthusiasm was contagious. "Your research shows how different species can enhance each other's survival capabilities. Why not apply that on a planetary scale?" They worked late into the night, combining Earth's terraforming algorithms with Zephyrian botanical integration techniques. Naira found herself relaxing in Marcus's presence, letting her guard down enough to gesture animatedly as she explained complex biological processes. Her drapes shifted with her movements, occasionally revealing glimpses of her unique patterns. "You know," Marcus said during a brief break, "on Earth, we have these things called fingerprints. Every human has them, and no two are exactly alike. They're completely random patterns, but they're also beautiful. They're part of what makes each person unique." Naira paused in her calculations. "How do humans handle such irregularity?" "We celebrate it," he said simply. Our art, our music, our dance, it's all about individual expression. Even our science benefits from different perspectives. He gestured to their current project. Look at what we're achieving by combining our different approaches. Before she could respond, Director Wheeler entered the lab. Naira instinctively reached to adjust her drapes, but stopped herself mid-motion. The director's perfectly geometric markings pulsed with a subtle hint of disapproval as he observed their proximity. Lead researcher Naira, his tone was professionally cold, the council requests your preliminary report on the terraforming progress. Of course, Director. She began gathering her data tablets, but Marcus spoke up. Actually, we've just made a breakthrough. Would you like to see it? Without waiting for a response, he projected their new integration model into the center of the lab. The hologram showed Kepler-9's transformation process, but unlike traditional terraforming that essentially overrode existing ecosystems, their model showed something more organic, a harmonious blend of imported and native life forms, each strengthening the other. It was beautiful in its complexity, its planned chaos. Director Wheeler's markings pulsed with reluctant interest. This is unexpected. Like many beautiful things, Marcus said, giving Naira a meaningful glance. Later that evening, as they refined their calculations, Naira found herself studying Marcus's profile in the soft light of the holographic displays. Why did you defend our work to the director? Because it's brilliant, he said without looking up from his calculations. And because I'm tired of watching you shrink every time someone in authority walks in. Your mind is extraordinary, Naira. Your ideas are changing how we think about planetary transformation. Why should you hide that just because you don't fit some arbitrary standard? You don't understand, she said softly. On Zephyria, harmony is everything. Pattern, symmetry, order, they're not just aesthetic preferences, they're cultural foundations. Marcus turned to face her fully. Then explain something to me. Your work, your theories about symbiotic adaptation, they're all about how different species can work together, how diversity strengthens ecosystems. Why can't the same principle apply to society? Naira's markings created a cascade of light beneath her drapes, matching the rhythm of her racing thoughts. Because. She started, then stopped. She had no answer. You know what I see when I look at your markings? Marcus asked, his voice gentle. I see innovation. I see adaptation. I see the kind of beautiful complexity that we're trying to create on Kepler-9. Your patterns aren't flaws, Naira. They're evolution in action. Something shifted in Naira's chest, a feeling both terrifying and exhilarating. She reached up and loosened her drapes slightly, letting them fall more naturally around her face. Her markings cast shifting patterns of light across the lab's crystal walls. Evolution in action, she repeated softly, watching her light dance with the holographic projections of their work. Perhaps you're right. Perhaps change isn't always disorder. Marcus smiled, that wonderfully asymmetrical expression that had become so dear to her. Change is the only constant in the universe. Fighting it is like fighting gravity. They worked through the night, their different approaches merging and adapting like the very systems they were designing. And if Naira's drapes slipped a little further, revealing more of her unique patterns as she lost herself in the work, neither of them mentioned it. But the lights of her markings reflected in Marcus's eyes told a story of their own, one of beauty found in unexpected places, of strength discovered in difference, and of two hearts beginning to beat to the same irregular rhythm. The echo of judgment. The news spread through the Interstellar Research Institute like a quantum ripple, impossible to contain, impossible to ignore. Naira had been seen in the botanical gardens without her drapes, her irregular markings fully visible, and more shockingly, she had been with the human, Marcus Hayes, both of them laughing as they studied the phosphorescent night blooms. The morning after, Naira stood before the Institute's conduct committee, her drapes restored but held differently now, more like a garment than a shield. The 7 committee members sat in perfect geometric formation, their symmetrical markings pulsing in synchronized disapproval. Lead researcher Naira, committee head Zalera began, her voice crystalline and sharp, your recent behavior has raised concerns about your commitment to Zephyrian values. Fraternization with off-worlders, public display of aesthetic irregularity, deviation from traditional research methodologies. My research results speak for themselves, Naira interrupted, her own markings flaring beneath her drapes. The Kepler-9 project is exceeding all projected success metrics. Through unorthodox methods, another committee member interjected. Methods that suggest a disturbing influence from external sources. Naira felt a familiar shame trying to surface, but something else rose to meet it, pride. Innovation often appears unorthodox at first. Our entire species evolved through adaptation, through change. Why should our science, or our society, be any different? The committee's markings pulsed in unified shock at her defiance. Before they could respond, the chamber's door opened, and Marcus strode in, still wearing his Earth diplomatic uniform. I apologize for interrupting, he said, not sounding apologetic at all, but I've just received word from Earth's Planetary Development Council. They're implementing our integration protocols across all their terraforming projects. They're calling it the Naira Protocol. The committee members' markings flickered with conflicting emotions, pride and international recognition warring with disapproval of its source. Zalera's voice remained cold. Mr. Hayes, this is a private disciplinary hearing. Actually, a new voice joined in, and Director Wheeler himself entered the chamber. This hearing is now concluded. His perfect markings pulsed with authority. The Council of Sciences has reviewed the Kepler-9 progress reports. They are impressed. Meanwhile, in the Earth diplomatic quarter, Marcus faced his own tribunal. Ambassador Chen stood before him, flanked by two senior diplomatic officers. Hayes, you're compromising our position here, Chen said, pacing the sterile office. Fraternizing with a lead researcher, disrupting their cultural norms, do you have any idea how delicate these negotiations are? Marcus stood straight, his scarred eyebrow raised slightly. With all due respect, Ambassador, our mission is to build bridges between cultures. How can we do that if we're afraid to cross them ourselves? There are protocols. Protocols that assume all cultures are static, unchanging. Marcus challenged. The Zephyrians are evolving. Their younger generation is questioning traditional aesthetics, exploring new ideas. Naira isn't just a lead researcher, she's a symbol of that change. She's a distraction, one of the officers muttered. Marcus's voice turned sharp. She's a brilliant scientist whose work is revolutionizing planetary transformation. The Naira Protocol isn't just advancing terraforming technology, it's proving that different approaches, different perspectives, can create something greater than the sum of their parts. Back in the Institute's crystal corridors, Naira was walking with Director Wheeler, trying to understand the sudden shift in her circumstances. The Council of Sciences has always valued progress, Wheeler explained, his tone carefully neutral. Your methods may be unconventional, but the results are undeniable. However, he paused, turning to face her, there are concerns about your public conduct. Naira touched her drapes lightly. My markings are not the issue, Wheeler interrupted, surprising her. The issue is change, and how we manage it. Many fear that too much change too quickly will fracture our society's harmony. Or perhaps, Naira said softly, it will help us find a new kind of harmony. Her markings created complex patterns of light that reflected off the crystal walls, and for the first time, she saw Wheeler study them with something like curiosity rather than dismissal. That evening, Naira found Marcus in their shared lab, looking troubled. Earth's diplomatic corps isn't happy with me, he said as she entered. The committee isn't pleased with me either, she replied, then did something that would have been unthinkable weeks ago, she removed her drapes entirely. Her markings cast ever-changing patterns across the lab's surfaces, like auroras dancing across a crystal sky. Marcus smiled, his face softening. You're beautiful when you're defiant. I'm beginning to think I'm just beautiful, she said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. Different, yes. Irregular, certainly. But beautiful in my own way. They worked late into the night, refining their protocols, but something had changed. Every disapproving glance, every whispered judgment had only strengthened their resolve. Their project wasn't just about terraforming anymore, it was about proving that beauty could exist outside of rigid patterns, that progress often required breaking from tradition. As they studied the latest data from Kepler-9, showing how their integrated approach was transforming the planet into something neither purely Earth-like nor traditionally Zephyrian, but uniquely, perfectly its own, Naira realized that perhaps they were transforming more than just a planet. "They'll keep judging us," she said softly, watching her markings create complex patterns in the holographic light. Marcus reached out and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in wonderful asymmetry. "Let them. Sometimes the most beautiful things in the universe are the ones that don't follow the rules." Outside their lab, both their societies continued to buzz with disapproval and speculation, but inside, in the light of their shared work and growing feelings, judgment felt as distant as the stars they were helping to reach, present, but unable to dim their brightness. Starlight's reflection. The crisis alarms blared through the Institute's crystal corridors, their sound harmonizing with the emergency pulses of light that raced across the walls. Naira burst into the main control center, her markings flashing with urgency, no drapes to hide their intense glow. The holographic displays showed Kepler-9's atmosphere swirling in dangerous patterns of red and orange. "Report," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority she'd grown into over the past months. "The integration matrices are destabilizing," her assistant, Ven, explained, his perfectly symmetrical markings dim with worry. "The native microorganisms are mutating faster than predicted. They're overwhelming the terraforming protocols." Marcus rushed in moments later, his diplomatic uniform wrinkled from sleep. "I just got the alert." "How bad?" "If we don't stabilize the system in the next 6 hours, we'll lose the entire ecosystem," Naira said, her markings creating complex patterns that matched the chaos on the screens. "Everything we've built will collapse." The control center filled with both Zephyrian and human scientists, all watching as their carefully crafted world began to unravel. Director Wheeler arrived, his usual composed demeanor strained. "The Council is demanding we revert to traditional terraforming protocols. They're saying the hybrid approach has failed." "No," Marcus and Naira said simultaneously. They looked at each other, sharing a moment of perfect understanding. "The problem isn't the integration," Naira said, stepping forward. Her markings pulsed with inspiration, casting dancing lights across the crystal walls. "It's our assumption that we could control every variable. We're still thinking in patterns, in perfect symmetry." Marcus caught on immediately. "Natural systems aren't perfect, they're adaptive. Remember what you told me about your markings? How they never repeat exactly the same way twice. That's not a flaw, it's evolution in action," Naira finished. She turned to the control panel, her fingers flying over the holographic interface. "We need to stop trying to force the system into predetermined patterns. Instead, let's give it room to find its own balance." Director Wheeler frowned. "That's completely against standard procedure. The Council would never." "The Council isn't standing in this room watching years of work collapse," Marcus interrupted. "Sometimes the biggest breakthroughs come from breaking the rules." Naira's markings flared brighter as she worked, their chaotic beauty reflecting off every surface. She no longer tried to hide them, if anything, she drew strength from their irregularity. "Look at the native organisms. They're not fighting our introduced species, they're trying to communicate with them. The patterns aren't random, they're a new form of symbiosis we've never seen before." Marcus leaned in, studying the data streams. "Like a planetary conversation." "Exactly." Naira's excitement made her markings pulse faster. "We've been trying to direct the conversation, but we need to let them find their own language." She began modifying the integration protocols, not to control the interaction between species but to facilitate it. Marcus worked beside her, his human perspective complementing her Zephyrian insights in ways that seemed almost magical. Their hands occasionally brushed as they worked, and each time, Naira's markings created new patterns of light, as unique as the moment itself. Hours passed in a blur of calculations and adjustments. The control center hummed with tension as they watched their unorthodox solution either save or destroy everything they'd worked for. Gradually, the angry reds and oranges in Kepler-9's atmosphere began to shift, not to the stable blues they'd originally planned, but to something entirely new, a swirling tapestry of colors that shouldn't have worked together but somehow created a perfect harmony. "It's beautiful," Ven whispered, his symmetrical markings pulsing with wonder. "It's alive," Naira corrected, watching as the planet found its own equilibrium. Not perfect, not predictable, but sustainable in its own unique way. Marcus stood close beside her, their shoulders touching. "Like us," he said softly, meant for her ears alone. In that moment, surrounded by the glow of success and her own unbridled markings, Naira finally understood what Marcus had been trying to tell her all along. Beauty wasn't about conforming to a predetermined pattern, it was about having the courage to create new patterns altogether. "The council will want an explanation," Director Wheeler said, but his tone had changed. He was looking at Naira's markings with new eyes, seeing not disorder but possibility. "Tell them we've discovered something better than perfection," Naira said. "We've discovered truth." Later that night, when the crisis had passed and the celebrations had quieted, Naira and Marcus stood in their lab, watching the latest data from Kepler-9 stream across the screens. Her markings created gentle waves of light that mingled with the holographic displays, turning the lab into a cathedral of living light. "You never once doubted your theory," Marcus said, turning to face her. "Even when everyone else wanted to fall back on the old ways." "I learned from you," she replied, reaching up to trace the scar above his eyebrow. "You showed me that our supposed flaws often hold our greatest strengths." "Naira," he said her name like a prayer, "you are the most beautiful being I've ever known. Not despite your differences, but because of them. Because you had the courage to be exactly who you are." Her markings responded to his words with a display more brilliant than any she'd ever created, filling the lab with patterns that defied description. And when he kissed her, she realized that some forms of beauty transcended species, transcended culture, transcended everything but the truth of the heart that recognized itself in another. The screens continued to show Kepler-9's transformation, its unique ecosystem blooming in wonderful imperfection. Like the planet they'd helped create, Naira and Marcus had found their own impossible harmony, proof that the universe's greatest works of art were often painted outside the lines. The new spectrum. 1 year after the Kepler-9 breakthrough, the Interstellar Research Institute's Grand Assembly looked vastly different from the austere chamber it had once been. Crystal walls that once reflected only perfect symmetry now danced with light from dozens of Zephyrians displaying their natural markings, some geometric, others swirling with unexpected patterns. Among them stood Naira, her unique bioluminescence creating aurora-like displays that no longer drew disapproving glances but admiring ones. She stood at the podium, preparing to address the first-ever Joint Council on Interspecies Cultural Evolution. The audience was a striking blend of Zephyrian and human delegates, their differences creating a beautiful tapestry of diversity. "A year ago," she began, her markings pulsing gently with each word, "I believed that beauty could only exist within strict parameters. I hid my true nature behind drapes and tradition, thinking that conformity was the path to acceptance." She paused, finding Marcus's eyes in the crowd. "I was wrong." The holographic displays behind her showed images of Kepler-9's transformation, not into a replica of either Earth or Zephyria, but into something gloriously unique. "Our greatest breakthrough wasn't just in terraforming technology. It was in understanding that true harmony doesn't come from enforced uniformity, but from the dance between differences." Director Wheeler, seated in the front row, nodded slowly. His own perfectly symmetrical markings now seemed less like a standard to be achieved and more like one note in a greater symphony. "The Naira Protocol," she continued, "has been implemented on 7 more planets, each developing its own unique ecosystem. But more importantly, it has sparked a revolution in how we think about adaptation, about beauty, about what it means to belong." She gestured to a group of young Zephyrians in the audience, their markings deliberately enhanced rather than hidden. Our youth no longer feel compelled to conform to a single standard of beauty. They're creating their own patterns, their own ways of shining. Marcus stood up from his seat, now wearing the formal robes of Earth's new Cultural Integration Corps, a department he had helped create. And humans, he added, are learning that our own diversity isn't a weakness to be overcome, but a strength to be celebrated. Our scars, our asymmetries, our differences, they're all part of the story that makes us who we are. Naira's markings created a spectacular display of light that drew gasps from the audience. "Look around this room," she said. "Once, we would have seen chaos in our differences. Now we see possibility. Every unique pattern, every unexpected combination, adds to the richness of our shared experience." The presentation continued with data from their ongoing research, not just on planetary transformation, but on cultural evolution. They showed how accepting diversity had led to unprecedented advances in science, art, and social development. Communities that had once been rigid and segregated were now vibrant and interconnected. But perhaps, Naira said, her voice softening, the most profound changes have been personal ones. She looked at Marcus again, and her markings created a pattern that matched the rhythm of her heart. "I learned that love doesn't seek perfection, it celebrates uniqueness. It doesn't demand conformity, it cherishes difference." Marcus walked up to join her at the podium, taking her hand. The gesture, once scandalous, now drew approving murmurs. "Together," he said, "we're writing a new definition of beauty. One that's big enough to encompass all the wonderful variations that exist across the universe." Ambassador Chen, who had once opposed their relationship, stood up. "The Earth Council has reviewed your proposal for an interspecies cultural exchange program. It has been unanimously approved." Director Wheeler rose as well. "As has the Zephyrian proposal to establish the first Mixed Heritage Academy, where our young ones can learn to value their unique attributes rather than hide them." Naira's markings blazed with joy, creating patterns that danced across the crystal walls like shooting stars. In the audience, she could see others beginning to let their own unique lights shine, some geometric, some flowing, some barely visible, but all part of the greater whole. Later that evening, Naira and Marcus stood in their special place, the botanical gardens where they had first dared to be themselves together. The night blooms glowed around them, their irregular patterns matching Naira's markings. "Did you ever imagine," Marcus asked, touching one of the luminescent flowers, "that our little act of rebellion would lead to all this?" Naira's markings created soft waves of light that merged with the garden's natural illumination. "Perhaps not consciously," she said, "but I think part of me always knew that truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. Beauty, once recognized, demands to be shared." He pulled her close, his familiar asymmetrical smile making her markings pulse with happiness. "You know, Earth's poets used to say that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. But I think they got it wrong. Beauty is in the courage to be beheld, exactly as you are." Above them, through the crystal dome, they could see Kepler-9 shining in the night sky, a testament to what could happen when different forms of beauty learn to coexist. Its swirling atmosphere, once considered a failure of standard terraforming, was now studied as a model of natural harmony. "We're not just changing worlds," Naira said, watching her markings create new patterns in response to Marcus's touch. "We're changing how worlds see themselves." As they stood together in the garden, their silhouettes cast double shadows in the bioluminescent light, one perfectly human, one uniquely Zephyrian, both beautiful in their own way. And in their joined reflection on the crystal walls, they saw what they had helped their peoples discover, that love, like light, knows no boundaries, and that the most beautiful patterns are often the ones we never expected to find.